And now it's time to introduce another Luca in the way of Lukas Neckermann. His presentation is the mobility revolution, and he comes from his company called the Neckermann Strategic Advisors. Lukas? Hi.
Thank you very much, Luca. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I have to say I agree with everything that's been said. And the danger is that a lot of what I'm going to say is going to go even further than that, and I think that not everything is going to be easy to digest. Some of you may disagree with some of what I have to say, but my job is to provoke a conversation, So 2 years ago, I released a book called The Mobility Revolution with basically highlighting 3 key trends that are impacting our industry. And I say our industry because it's one that I'm, like you, very, very passionate about. And the key trends are zero emissions, zero accidents, and zero ownership. Electrification, autonomous, and shared. Everything else falls into those categories. But before we can talk about those things, we need to understand why it is that these trends are taking place. Now, very, very obviously, we all know the figures of urbanization, right? We have all heard this figure, 70% of the world's population is going to be blah, 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 blah. Forget that figure, because today already 74% of the European population is living in urban areas, and 82% of the North American population is living in urban areas. So that other statistic, forget it, because it is fact now. And these urban areas are now fighting to create a high quality of life for its citizens. Polluted air causes over 5 million deaths a year, and overwhelmingly this is, of course, in the cities that we live in. That means that for city mayors and city legislatures, this is becoming the single key issue. So last year we had, or this year actually, excuse me, in London, a mayoral election. The mayor was elected, and it was every single campaign, every single party's top thing on the agenda to clean the air in London, because almost 10,000 people die, and in the nicest parts of London even, almost 10% of deaths are directly attributable to air pollution. So when this is the fact, in cities like London, in Paris, etc., 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 it becomes a top issue. And I don't need to tell you that how cities can react to this. So in London, it already costs about €15 to drive into the city, and recently our mayor, Sadiq Khan, has said for old diesels, we're going to add another £10, another 12, 13 euros. So consider, if you have an old diesel, that it will cost you €30 per day to drive into London, if even you're allowed to drive into the London. And that's not including parking costs, which are going to be emissions dependent in the future. That's right. If you emit more, parking costs more, etc., etc., etc. These are measures that cities are taking to increase the quality of life of citizens. And it's not just that. Cities are pedestrianizing. This is a picture here of Paris on a car-free day. Mayor Hidalgo in Paris has also said it's her aim, absolutely, to make the center of Paris car-free, or at least as far as possible emissions-free. There are about 30 other cities that are looking to copy London and Paris. Go car-free. Helsinki has said we want to go entirely car-free, and they're going to move to an entire mobility system. Beyond that, you see cities all over, not just Europe, but the world, putting in bike lanes, right? And I'll talk about the reasons for that in just a moment, but I'm going to introduce you to a term. And that term is the road diet. Yeah? Just like all of us, when we want to take a diet, it means slimming things down. So this is an image of Mexico City, where there's a 12-lane highway that goes through the middle of Mexico City that's been proposed and accepted now that they're going to change this to a 4-lane highway with public transport, with the rest being pedestrianized. And this type of activity is going on all over the world. Road diets are a reaction to urbanization, a reaction to increasing the quality of life. So you see on the left slide, this is a picture in San Francisco, and on the right-hand side of this slide, you see what they aim for 6th Street to look like in San Francisco, reducing traffic throughput in the cities. The average speed of travel by car in London is less than 10 kilometers per hour. Why bother? You can walk almost that quickly, and you can certainly bike that quickly. And the consequence of that is that for 20 years in London, the share of journeys by car has gone down from over 50% to now 35%, whilst the share of journeys by rail, by bus, by walking, and by bicycle has gone up. And it's not just London. All over the world, people are saying, I'd rather not have an automobile anymore. Or, well, I'll keep this one, but I may not buy another one. In fact, the millennials, so this younger generation, now 19 to 34-year-olds in the UK, over 40% of this generation has already given up on their car. And if you look at cities like Berlin and Vienna, certainly London, and other cities where young people simply don't get driver's licenses anymore. So my message to you is, not just is diesel dead, not just is driving dying, but car ownership itself is in question, because it simply doesn't make sense anymore in our urban areas. So, I've got 3 essential chapters. I'm going to talk first a little bit about zero emissions and the electrification challenge. All right? Now, what I'm going to show you is not my slide. This is what you're faced with. This is social sentiment of the internal combustion engine right now. This is an advertising campaign that you can see all over London. Meet Lisa, an 8-year-old emissions filter. The internal combustion engine is becoming as popular as the cigarette. And regulation means it's going to get stomped out, just like cigarettes. These numbers are not new to you because you know them. You deal with them every single day. These are the CO2 challenges that you're faced with, right? And the fact is, for internal combustion engineers, it is ever more difficult to achieve those targets. For every % improvement in internal combustion engine efficiency, it's costing more and more and more. And it is becoming, frankly, unachievable. So if you're spending more to make internal combustion engines comply, and at the same time, battery technology is improving, not by 1, 2, 3, 4% per year, but by 5%, 10% per year. You have to realize that you're faced with an uphill battle. These aren't my numbers. Goldman Sachs has calculated battery cost to drop by over 50%, battery weight to drop by over 50%. Now, even if you believe only half of that, that's fine. Even if you think that that's mostly garbage, just remember the trend. The trend is against the internal combustion engine. And the trend is for the electrification. That's clear, and that's undebatable. So it's not a question of if, but how quickly. And thank you, Luca, for mentioning Tesla. We think of Tesla as this little car company that only sells 50 or 100,000 cars. Yes, that's true. But let's not forget, they have one car right now, well, 2 now, in one segment. And guess what? Inside that segment, they are, by far and away, the #1 sellers in the US. They outsell Audi, BMW, Lexus, Mercedes-Benz. So let's see it in the context of what they are and what they can do and what they already have achieved. And with the upcoming Model 3, if that doesn't scare everybody in this room who is involved with internal combustion engine, I don't know what will. It's not a question of if, but how quickly and when. And we are hitting that turning point now. Next up, autonomous vehicles. Zero accidents. That's the target, right? We heard it from Volvo. You know the numbers as well as I do. Over 1.2 million lives lost each year to traffic accidents. The tragedy is not just that these lives are being lost, but that they're avoidable. We as humans are bad drivers. Let's get this into our heads. We need to understand we are bad drivers. We cause 90% of the accidents. Robots are better at it because they don't drink alcohol. They don't feel the need to text their husbands and wives while driving. Robots have exactly one job, and that's to get you home safely. And it's the reason that people like Elon Musk have speculated that at some point we will outlaw driving cars because it's simply too dangerous. I mean, it's a silly thing that we do. We put ourselves into a 2-ton killing machine and kill our friends and neighbors. It's tragic, really. It's not just the fact that it is dangerous, but it's frankly unpleasant. I mentioned to you earlier how fast or how slow people travel in traffic, and if you ever spend any time on the American highways, getting to work, boy, that's a real chore. So why would you actively drive when you could sleep on your way to work, like this gentleman? Or text, or do your PowerPoint presentations, or do your Excel diagrams, blah, 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 blah. All right? We're here now. We're here there. And it's not just our industry, it's plenty of other industries that have already made the transition. Okay? So, if you take a look and speak to miners in Australia, the bulk of mining trucks in Australia are being steered by an office about 1,000 kilometers away from where the mines actually are. And guess what? These mining trucks that are operating autonomously, they don't strike, they don't get sick, they don't get injured, they work 24/7. It's safer and it's more efficient. Agriculture. I grew up in a farming area. Most boring thing in the world is driving for 7 hours on a tractor. Why would you do that if autonomous tractors, and John Deere is in fact the world's biggest supplier of autonomous vehicles, can do it for you? And as normal as it is in the mining industry and the agriculture industry, that's how normal it will be on our streets to see Google cars, Uber cars, Daimler cars, etc., Volvo cars, etc., that are being driven without human interference. Without human interference, because we stop believing that we're better at driving. Nothing unusual. Everybody and their brother obviously getting involved with autonomous vehicle projects. I don't need to tell you, hopefully your organizations are involved, if not directly, then indirectly in autonomous vehicle projects. So make sure to get involved, because the speed is enormous. Now, just to compare, the telephone took 75 years to hit 50 billion users. The radio took 38 years to hit 50 million users. TV, 13 years. Facebook, 3.5 years. This is Silicon Valley speed that we're talking about, okay? 3.5 years for 50 million users. Our industry, it took us 83 years from patent until the seatbelt became standard equipment in cars. It took us 45 years before the airbag went from being developed before it became standard equipment in cars. That's an improvement, isn't it? ESP, 27 years. Once again, an improvement, and thanks to the Moose who helped us along the way. The next technology is autonomous emergency braking. Within 10 years, AEB, as we all know, is going to be standard equipment in all cars. So we, as an industry, are learning to accelerate. And that's very important because just using AEB and together with adaptive cruise control and parking assistance and autopilot and these things, we already have the hardware in the vehicle that we require for full autonomous driving. And that means that when we have that hardware in the vehicles, we can start making a few projections, all right? Adaptive cruise control, lane keeping, autonomous braking, we're there already. Autopilot, first on the highways, and then the cities. I expect this to be standard equipment fairly soon. To be honest, every time I present this slide, I move the green bars a little bit to the left because I keep hearing new and new announcements of when these things are coming out and the commitments of some of you, some of your companies. On commercial vehicles, we've already seen so trucks, right? Trucks doing platooning, road trains. Those platoons have driven across Europe autonomously as road trains and in pilot projects. So we still have the backup, in other words, the human backup, right? It's like flying in an airplane. The pilot in the front is really only a backup, and more often than not actually causes the accident than the technology. What about the legal side of things? The reduction in vehicle crashes as per ADAS, but also the next step, level 3 and level 4 autonomy, is going to give us the full roadmap to full autonomy. And more importantly, even than the legal side, is the social aspect, because I expect within 10 years, people will demand autonomous. They're going to embrace it over the next 3 to 4 years, and then they will demand it. They will not even question driving. All right? So this is my roadmap for autonomous travel. Next part, zero ownership. Look, you can get all of these statistics, annual revenues from car sharing going through the roof, the usual hockey stick, lots of fun, car sharing, every car manufacturer is on car sharing. That's fun, but you still have to drive it yourself. How many of you use Uber just to... Okay. So in the US, there's a company called Certify that basically does all of the travel receipts. So when you go home to your companies, you give the receipts to your secretary, and they manage all of this, yeah? And in the US, there's a company that does this, and over the past 2 years, they have seen, the top line that you see there is receipts for car rentals. The second line that you see is receipts for taxis. The bottom line is ride-hailing. Within the last 2 years, they have seen ride-hailing, in other words, Uber and also Lyft, exceed first taxis and then car rentals. Within 2 years, people on business trips effectively stopped wanting to drive themselves. Now, even if you think that that line might not continue in the same trajectory, we're already there. We're already there. The next step is starting to reinvent what vehicles actually look like. So I sit on the board of this company that you see on the screen here. This is called Next Future Transportation. We're actually in an accelerator in Dubai right now where we've gotten some funding to develop vehicles that are shared and autonomous, on demand, and by the way, electric anyway. We take that for granted. Tomorrow is actually today because this stuff is happening and it's being developed. The first self-driving taxis actually debuted in Singapore. And a week later, yes, a week later, Uber was very upset that they weren't first. A week later, Uber launched their first self-driving taxi fleet in Pennsylvania. Now, the relevance of this isn't that they have these things on a Ford, but the relevance of this is that they are beginning to think about what does a vehicle look like that will be shared. Now, whether or not you believe this headline or not, this was published about six months ago. Uber reportedly orders 100,000 autonomous cars from Mercedes for self-driving cars. Was never substantiated either by Mercedes or by Uber, but it doesn't matter. It will happen. At some point, Uber and Lyft and others will go to you as manufacturers and suppliers and say, this is how I want the car to look like. They are going to define the car, not the end customer, but Uber. Because the end customer, who today owns a car and drives itself, maybe tomorrow says, well, I don't own a car, I use car sharing, and maybe says, I don't own a car, I rely on Uber and Lyft, like so many people in cities like London and Paris and Amsterdam and Milan, and all over Europe already do. But if you're outside of the cities, you say, okay, fine. I still want to own a car, but I will let the car drive me. That's fine. That's a different trajectory on this curve. But irrespective of how you approach our industry with shared vehicles on the left and on the right, and owned vehicles on the left. Autonomous on the top, human-driven on the bottom. You can guess what happens in the top right corner. The top right corner says, I don't own a car, I don't drive a car, I rely on driverless mobility on demand. The magic word that you'll hear more and more is mobility as a service, MaaS. All right? This is me getting out my mobile phone and saying, I need to get from here to there, and I will be driven. Now, what does that mean then for your industry, my industry, our industry? Well, it means that if I'm being driven, then these wonderful things on the left side, these steering wheels with very important logos on them, will become irrelevant. And those very important logos will also become less relevant. If you don't have a steering wheel in front of you, if you don't own a car, if you don't have a financial service commitment to Mercedes-Benz Financial Services, to BMW Financial Services, et cetera, and your financial commitment is 300 euros a month to Uber, 500 euros a month to Lyft, or Ubico, or Autolib, or Move, whoever, that's your primary point of reference. The brand for your mobility is not defined by what's on the steering wheel. The brand for mobility is what's defined by your smartphone. Now, I'm coming on to the last slide. What, again, does this mean for you? The value chain that we have known, development, production, marketing, sales, dealership, is history. The value chain of mobility looks very different. It will still have first-tier supply, but we have software developers in parallel. We still have original equipment manufacturers. We have still somebody who's printing cars. But we will have mobility operators. And we will have meta apps. And with that, I mean those apps on the phone that will let you get from here to London to Amsterdam. Many manufacturers have already said, no, we're not a car maker anymore, we're a mobility provider. And that's fine, and that's great. And I applaud those manufacturers who have said that, because whoever hasn't said it needs to commit where on this new value chain they are. They may say, okay, we are happy just being a manufacturer, but that means that they lose touch with the customer. The brand of the manufacturer is no longer relevant. We are seeing examples. Deutsche Post, for example, has decided to make its own electric delivery vehicles. So the end customer says, wait, electric vehicles are actually easier to produce, and I can have them produced, contract manufacture them, according to my needs. And you will have seen that Baidu and Foxconn have entered into a relationship. Now, why is that? Because Baidu also has a self-driving technology, and there's a link via Tencent to sharing. Foxconn is very good at producing electric devices, and they have capacity to build electric vehicles. So you can see that some of those suppliers may even move up and turn to becoming manufacturers in their own right. Who then owns the customer? Who is the last point of contact to the customer? It's going to be companies that produce apps, and it's going to be companies that produce mobility as a service solutions, who say to you, and there's a wonderful model of this happening in Finland actually, called WIM, of mobility as a service, where they have a subscription model, where they say, okay, you spend 500 euros a month, and we guarantee we will get you there from A to B. Just like your mobile phone, you have a flat rate, and that flat rate will be for taxis, it will be for public transport, it will be for whatever you need. And somewhere in that new value chain, you will find Google and Baidu and Foxconn. You'll find dealerships because they have a role in this. You'll certainly also find Apple. This is my personal view. It may look different. There may be other players involved. But I think it's important that we realize the value chain of mobility in the future is going to look very, very different. And it's very important for your companies to get on board with this, to understand, as I said, we have trends that are defining our industry that are irrefutable and are happening a lot faster than most of us believe. Default auto is dead. The idea that if I leave my house and get into my car to get to work, to go shopping, to go anywhere, is gone. I live this way already. I don't own a car anymore, and this is me. I'm a car guy. When I leave my house, I go on Citymapper, and Citymapper tells me, okay, you could get an Uber, or you can get this and that, and public transport, bus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or you could get a car share. And there are lots and lots of people out there for whom the auto is no longer passion, but it has become a liability. That's it.